that, that time period and that particularly that moment in time in 1980 was kind of a it was a really, I don't know what the word is. It was a pivotal moment in New York history. You had you had punk rock going on. You had the whole downtown art scene happening. All the arts were involved in it. And at the same time, you had the sense that the city had bottomed out, that it was, you didn't know where this was going to go. And, of course, like a lot of these moments in time, it's ephemeral. It fades, it changes, you can't preserve these moments as in amber or whatever the expression is, forever. And you have to accept that. So people look back at that time period, and then with the juxtapositions that I brought in the book, it makes it all the more poignant. And so I think that there's a great deal of interest in that book because of that. And that brings us to the new book, which is kind of why we're here with this podcast, which is that years later, I re-photographed New York, but with a different attitude about how the city has been transformed and it's a different place and it has its own kind of present day integrity that is different from back then.
Welcome to the show, Brian.
It's good to be here, Patrick.
So glad to have you on. I've been diving through your website. I know when we first started, as our previous conversation before we started recording, you were talking about that your website was kind of a work in progress, but I got through enough of it to where I really enjoyed what I saw. And so I'm so glad to have you on the show. We had some kind of back and forth, as we were emailing, but we finally got you here. So I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here too.
So before we jump into your work, which I love, you have some great work in New York that spans quite a long time. A great body of work from the 80s, and but before we jump into any of the work, let's take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm originally from Virginia, and I started out with an interest in urban design and architecture, and decided in the midst of that I would switch to art school and was going to become a photographer. And this was in the 70s, and I was doing black and white photography, and I was really excited at one point to about the possibility of doing color. And this was a really new thing at that time. And I was in Baltimore at the art school there, and no one in the faculty was doing color, and I decided I had to go somewhere else. And I managed to get to Cooper Union in New York City.
Wow.
Where I studied with Joel Meyerowitz, who was one of the pioneers of color photography. Joel was right in the middle of doing his Cape Light book at that time, using 4x5 film. And so it was quite an exciting time to be in New York and to be with this sort of group of people that were interested in color photography. So that's how I got to New York.
That's awesome. So you kind of made that initial kind of, what am I trying to say here? So you kind of already knew you wanted to do photography. And so how did you find your way into that? Were you always kind of an artist and photographer? Talk to me about the kind of the early
Well,
Brian.
when I was I had a camera. I got a camera when I was about 16. Um, it was I had really was interested in it. I didn't think of it necessarily as my career at that point. And I uh, was trying to get my parents to allow me to buy this camera. I actually had some money as a 16-year-old because this was in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I was in the Colonial Williamsburg Fifes and Drums, which was a paid group that performed regularly. We marched up and down the street there. We performed for presidents and heads of state around the world. It was a very prestigious group to be associated with, and I actually had a little bit of money. So I got them finally to say, okay, yes, you can spend some of your money on a camera. And I was all ready to get this Nickermat, which was a lower priced Nikon. It was a beautiful camera at that time. And I made the mistake of not being home when I was supposed to for my younger sister. And they told me that I couldn't get the camera. So I was devastated. So at some point, I just surreptitiously bought the camera and started taking pictures. And about a year later, got them to agree that I could get the camera. I had saved all the packing, the box and everything, and I repacked it and pretended to be buying it new and opened it up and showed it to them. So that's either like a terrible thing to say, or it's like shows you how committed I was to this, to doing photography. And I took a class from a local photographer in his house, where he showed us slides of famous and photographers. And that's where he showed me pictures of Cartier-Bresson. And I remember him telling me at one point, because he liked the work I was doing, he was saying, your work is already as good as Cartier-Bresson. Which of course I knew he was lying, but it meant a lot because it meant that he thought that I, could do things on that level.
That's awesome. I think that early encouragement is like really important. And so you got the bug from there, do you think?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, big time. And I wanted to, I was into music as well. I wrote songs, played the guitar, I was taking pictures. It was all happening at the same time. And then I was doing trying to get this degree in urban planning, urban design, and decided I had to focus. And so, much to my parents' consternation, I decided to go to art school, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's a tough conversation, especially as a photographer. No, not a lot of people actually know how you make that work. And so you made that switch, and you kind of started to photograph, and you made your way to New York, excited about color photography. So how did you push yourself? Like, how did you evolve? Was it projects that kind of inspired you, or how did you evolve as a photographer? I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, at first I was shooting black and white 35 millimeter,
Sure.
like most people, and doing my own.
I was thinking about that when you said that, because at that time you were like, no one was doing color. But when I went back to school in 2020 or whatever, everyone had stopped doing color and was only doing black and white. And so it kind of reversed. It kind of on top of each other. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but it kind of made me think of that. Well, go ahead.
The problem with the color was technical. There were technical problems. The materials were not great. And the what few galleries there were at that time looked at color as somehow a cheapened kind of photography,
Mm.
and didn't take it seriously. They also were aware that it was the material was not as archival as what they were used to. So there were a lot of impediments. It was being used in advertising. It was being used in a few magazines like the National Geographic, which was an early user of color. And my instructor, Joel Meyerowitz, he came out of that commercial advertising world, and but he started to do it as a fine art, and he was shooting 35 millimeter Kodachrome, which is a stable material. It's the prints that are made from that were not so stable. But if you did dye transfers, that was a stable material, and that's what he and William Eggleston used in those early days. I couldn't afford to have dye transfers made, but I did begin to make color prints in a darkroom that was available to me at school. I had to do it by hand. It was like not very, not the greatest setup, but I made prints, and then from there I did most of my color printing using more mechanized processors that were available from a rental lab in New York. So I became an expert printer as a result.
That's, especially in color, because you have to do each stage, each color in order, and then it's also the film. It's interesting processing the film. It's really interesting. I really wanted to do it. I could just never find anyone that could teach me. I know the C41 process, I think, because I was doing slide. Yeah, what's that?
C41, yes. That I haven't heard that term in a number of years.
Well, I was researching it. I was looking at all the videos online, and then I found different tubs because you have to keep it at a certain temperature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I found all of those different processes.
So there was this great lab in New York called My Own Color Lab, which everyone went to who wanted to do color printing. And they had these large color processors, and they had individual rooms with enlargers. So you'd expose your paper, carry it in a box, light tight box, into the room and feed into a dark room and feed it into the machine. And that allowed you to make prints. And I did that for years, and I met a lot of photographers there, fairly famous people actually, who would come in there. Sometimes you'd be looking over their shoulders at their work and vice versa, because we'd be saying, well, is this a little too yellow? Is this a little too red? Could it, because color is very subjective, and it's often difficult to make these kinds of decisions. So that was a kind of a little center of activity in New York, was My Own Color Lab.
I think that's really interesting. Well, the people you would run into.
People don't know this history. I mean, I remember, Nan Golden coming in one time, Gursky coming in one time. They didn't necessarily do their own printing, but they had other people working with them to print. There were a lot of people like that were there. And I did it for my own fine art work, but I also did it for my clients who needed prints for various reasons.
Oh, wow.
But it was really the center of a lot of things in New York at that time.
I think that's interesting, and well, it's really interesting history, number one, and the people you were actually probably running into, or maybe didn't know you did. Sometimes, I just think that is like really interesting. I'm even thinking about a show right now. Could you imagine doing a show based off of that? Like what came through there?
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting. I know chemistry. I know chemistry, especially color. It's seasoned, like a fresh one versus like one that's processed a little bit. And so a lot of people like to stay with the same lab because of, kind of the type of results that they get from a particular either machine or a person or whatever. And so it's really quite interesting. I guess it goes back there is that like, okay, so you're developing this practice, you're running into all of these really interesting photographers. And so you went to art school. And so how did you evolve? I guess I'm going to go back to that original question.
Well,
What made you keep going? What made you evolve? Was it the process or was it the city? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, obviously the city had a big impact on me. I was, one of these people that wanted to go to New York for all of the idealistic, dreamy eyed reasons that other people do, whether they're actors or musicians or whatever. So in that way, I was, there was nothing unusual about me. And I arrived in the city at this moment. It was 1977. The city was like falling apart. There were fires. There was abandonment. In fact, the first day I was there, first day I was there was in 1977 was the day of the blackout of 1977. And I spent the night in Penn Station overnight with the police telling us not to go upstairs. I was actually there to get an apartment that day, and I was going back down south. That's why I was in the station. And upstairs in the city, there were riots, and the neighborhoods were burning down. And I got on the train finally in early morning and got down to Washington, D.C. and saw the headlines, in the paper. I had no idea what was going on. So that was the kind of atmosphere I was going into. On the other hand, the Lower East Side and Lower Manhattan in general, downtown New York was, it was like a mecca for creatives, and it was cheap. It was there were things about it that were just incredibly inspiring. So, and then I was there at Cooper, and I was coming into contact with all of these amazing people, and so the whole situation was, for me, I had no doubt this was where I wanted to be and where I needed to stay.
Yeah, it's interesting. A city can make you fall in love with it, but you went into a really hectic time. You were talking about how, the resulting body of work that you ended up doing, you ended up turning into a book, that 1980s New York and stuff like that.
When I got out of school, I immediately jumped into a big project. I went to Cooper Union, which was tuition free, so I didn't have any debt whatsoever, and
that would be amazing.
Wow, getting in there was like lucky a lottery. Yeah, so I just am, I had an apartment that you just cannot believe it. Even in 1980, you cannot believe that I was paying $50 a month for an apartment.
Wow.
And it was a dump. It was a slum, but it was mine, and I could operate out of there.
Sure.
And I was printing at my own color lab, so I didn't need to have darkroom there. But the project started. I had gotten involved in a neighborhood organization that was a housing activist group, and they were all about preserving low income housing. And I became really aware of this neighborhood that I was living in, and I decided that I wanted to photograph it and do it with the kind of intensity and focus and that people like Berenice Abbott had brought to photographing New York, decades before, or that, Atje had brought to photographing Paris. And I even met Bernice Habit at one point at an event. She was quite elderly at that time, and but I shook her hand, and
Wow.
that connection back through her to Atje and the whole history of photographing the urban landscape. I mean, it was like a shock of electricity through me that I sort of immediately understood that this was what I was about and what I needed to do.
That's, New York is different than Williamsburg, for sure. So what was it about New York that caught your imagination, do you think? I know you talked about the idealism, but, that disappears after a few years of living in a place. The same thing happens with Paris. You come out here with love in the air, you know what I mean? But then you start to, I was here during the riots when they were burning trash, and
Yeah.
the veneer wears off. So what kept you there, and what captured your imagination?
Well, after doing the Lower East Side project, which took a year, and I did this actually as a collaboration with another photographer named Edward Fausti. He and I both came out of Cooper together, and there were reasons for doing it. Aside from just our compatibility as photographers, I was concerned about photographing the Lower East Side alone with this equipment, and because it was dangerous out there at times, particularly certain areas. I also didn't have a 4x5 view camera, and I really thought that I needed to bring that kind of camera into this project. It needed to be the kind of documentation I wanted to do. I felt needed to be done with that kind of detailed, the kind of detail that sheet film brings. So he had a camera, and so we talked and decided, let's just try shooting together and see what would happen. And we spent an entire year working together and doing that project. We split up after that, but it was, it's not like we came to some iceberg and fell apart or anything. It was just, you can only do that so long. So, so from there, I did some other New York stuff, and but decided that I wanted to, look elsewhere for, projects. So in 1985, I actually just went to Germany and started photographing the Iron Curtain border all the way across Europe. And that was a one hell of a project. Thousands of kilometers of travel, and I went in the summer of 1985. I traveled from the Baltic to the Adriatic Seas.
Wow.
With side trips to Berlin. And then I got back to New York, and I discovered that I had a light leak in my the bellows of my 4x5 camera, and about half of the film was unprintable.
Oh no.
So
You never know that in the moment. It's that's unfortunate.
right. Well, later I would shoot Polaroid film, like for clients and things like that, when I was doing architectural photography shoots and things like that. So you would see that problem, but Polaroid was expensive, and
Yeah, it is.
I was just shooting it without that kind of verification that I would have gotten from that. So I didn't know. So I get back to New York. I'm totally devastated. I'm like ready to just pack this up. But then I just decided, well, I have to just go back. So at the end of the summer, I went back. So I had done one trip of 5 weeks, and then I went back and did another trip of 5 weeks. I did the entire thing all over again, from one end of the Iron Curtain to the other. And that was, so yes, I was still living in New York, but my attention for a while there was in Europe. So New York was serving as a kind of base of operations for me, and I still feel that way about it. I mean, I have great love for the city, and I have people here, and you know, but I wasn't hyper focused on New York as a subject for quite a while. It was only when I came back to, it was really after 9/11 that I felt like I needed to re-engage with photographing the city.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I did that that project, and what I continued to photograph Berlin after the wall came down, and that's a body of work that got published as The Lost Border: The Landscape of the Iron Curtain in around 2004.
It's interesting. I guess when I think about that kind of that fascination. So you went from a purely urban environment, and then you start kind of photographing kind of these barriers. Do you see a connection between the two fascinations, or?
Well, my interest is I always use this term. I don't know if it's really the best term or not. I refer to the cultural landscape as opposed to the urban landscape, meaning that landscapes that have some connection to human interaction or construction. So the idea of the imposition of a border across the landscape is a fascinating thing to me, and it continues to be. I mean, the idea that we make these artificial borders and barriers, and the certainly the political discussions in the U.S. now about the Mexican border. It's like it's just craziness, but there was nothing crazier than the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
It was
Well, now it makes sense. Now I'm kind of making sense of kind of that connection, and because I'm seeing kind of a link, but that brings so much clarity. So continue. You're saying something.
Well, the thing about the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall was that, in some ways it was on the ground. It was an impediment, of course, to the movement of people, and people died trying to escape and get across that border. And there was this whole apparatus. On the other hand, it was just a flimsy thing. The it was really more of a tripwire, between the two superpowers of the Soviet Union and the United States. And in that sense, if it was like a nuclear tripwire. So there was on the one hand, there was the situation on the ground, but then over it all was the threat that there could be nuclear conflagration. So, and the whole idea that the world had been split into two hemispheres of power was projected onto this, these fences and walls that ran across the entire continent of Europe, even to the south in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. They didn't have fences, but when I was down there at one point on the Austrian Yugoslav border, someone tried to get out from probably a East German or someone from elsewhere in Europe, Eastern Europe, was shot by a guard trying to get out. So even down there was that kind of
There's a very evident cultural, governmental kind of structure. That's really interesting. I think about in modern times, and I immediately went to the that little area in between that separates North Korea and South Korea, and thinking about these separations of worlds yeah, that's fascinating. So we're not we're not going to get to look at that body of work, are we? I don't think
I
so.
don't have the best I don't have the best. You just mentioned Korea. I just got this text from my son, who's a journalist, by the way, a young journalist, but he was saying the video coming out of South Korea is really crazy. It looks like it may escalate from here. I don't know what's going on.
There's this old saying. There's this old Chinese saying, may you not live in interesting times, and it's kind of, and it's like a blessing.
We're definitely living in interesting times right now.
Yeah, and that's the not the blessing, is if you live in interesting times, then it's not a good thing. It's so the blessing is may you not live in it. Yeah, which is fascinating.
So
go ahead.
When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, I was in New York. I had a close friend who lived in Berlin, and she was keeping me up to date day by day what was going on. And at first I didn't immediately go over there because there were some holes in the wall and there were people crossing, but I needed something more to do the kind of photography I was doing. So at the middle of December, about a month after I believe it was November 9th is when it opened. About a month after that, I went over there and photographed the last few weeks of December of '89, when people were, chipping away at the wall and sort of acting out this expression of freedom. You could go through the checkpoints, but people still felt the need to somehow break through the wall. And, that was at a moment where, you felt this kind of hope for the future that I'd never experienced before, and unfortunately have not experienced since. I feel like that was a moment of real potential for humanity that was in the end squandered. But the symbolism of it still exists, and I feel like the work that I did during that time period is was important. And ironically, there were not too many other photographers who did what I did. It's not like it is today where you can't do anything that hasn't already been done. It's like there's so many photographers doing everything all the time, everywhere. I almost don't even pay attention to it. I know that, I'm doing this book about the ends of the subway lines in New York. I know there are other people who have done something similar, but I just I just don't even pay attention. But I remember when I was showing my pictures at one point to a curator at the Museum of Modern Art of my pictures of the Iron Curtain, and he said, can't believe this, he said, but nobody else has actually done this. And that's would be inconceivable today. It'd be I don't know how to make the comparison, but there weren't not that many people doing that kind of thing at that time.
Well, and at that particular moment in time, it was kind of it's historical significance now. It's important. And this goes back to some advice that I had heard from someone. They said, if you're worried, and I'm so glad you brought this up, if you're worried about ever, photographing something because someone has already done it, the fact of the matter is that you're standing right there and that person isn't. So that particular moment in time is your document of that time in history in your perspective. So take the shot and take a lot of them. And you could put together a collection of images that actually, when you look back at it 10, 15 years later, can have some kind of significance. You did that. And so, like, especially in that, and so you captured a really interesting moment in time that you were a witness of, and it's inspiring, honestly. You know what I mean?
Well,
Even in a time where you think everyone has already done it, they haven't done it like you.
well, I've never understood people who can't figure out like what to do next.
You always knew?
There, well, I don't, I always am going from one thing to another, and for some
You're never
reason,
without an idea.
no, I've always got an idea.
Oh, I need that.
And well, like when when I was in the middle of the pandemic, I was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I I just decided to photograph Williamsburg, and these empty streets, which were really eerie and kind of powerful in that eeriness. And then I realized as I was doing it, and I did a little research online, that actually nobody had ever photographed Williamsburg in that way before. So that became a kind of unique project. And although I self-published it. I still sold 3 or 400 books and got some attention for it. Um, it turned out to be a significant moment to have documented. So you just, and then during that time period, when the um, Black Lives Matter demonstrations, protests were taking place because of the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis. My eye was looking toward Richmond, Virginia, which is down from where I was originally from. What was happening? I was questioning what would happen to those statues along Monument Avenue of Confederate generals, and as it turns out, they were the focus of the protests down there. And I realized they weren't going to last much longer.
Yeah.
So I just jumped in a rental car and went and started photographing it. And that ended up being a book. So it's just like one thing after another. You just, and they all somehow connect. And the other thing is you maintain your curiosity and your interest in what's going on in the world, and the ideas just percolate all the time.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear you talk like that, because so many things that we kind of witness, I guess, as individuals, whether it's through the news or at firsthand. I wish I would have been out there with a camera during those riots, the trash riots and stuff. Oh my gosh, Paris, when they had stopped picking up trash in certain neighborhoods. My neighborhood didn't get affected. We had private trash collection in my part of of Paris, but in a lot of it, these big piles, and then the burning, the smoke, and then the interactions. It was just unbelievable to witness. If I would have just taken a moment just to photograph it in my way, not necessarily tried to do it news way, I could have really had something interesting. Partly due to the fact go ahead.
Well, for me, I'm not a photojournalist, so I don't go sort of chasing after breaking news, or I sometimes will be on the periphery of breaking news. But I'm usually looking at the bigger picture. I think one kind of inspiring project to me was the Paul Graham's pictures of the Troubles in Ireland, where he photographed Northern Ireland and what was going on there with a view camera. This is, I don't know how many decades ago this is now, but staying back, I think made it a more interesting and more powerful way of expressing what was going on, instead of the close-in views of people clashing and explosions and, all of that. He showed the lay of the land. He showed what was happening to the landscape and to the urban landscape. Are you familiar with that work?
No, but it's really interesting. I had another guest on that was talking a little bit about some of the different kinds of conflicts that were going on, the war of espionage and stuff like that. And so I haven't heard about this one, but as you talk about it and talk about the approach and talk about the perspective that was taken, I appreciate that too. That's probably the way I would have done it. Like when I think back to that moment, I was just kind of reflecting on and wishing I had a camera. That's probably what I would have done. I wouldn't have been in the clashes, even though I was caught up in a few. I didn't mean to. I was just walking home from school. So it was just really, it's quite interesting to kind of hear your take on a lot of this stuff. And I relate to you on the fact that I'm not a photojournalist, nor do I want to be, I'm just kind of reflecting on my time, and I just so happen to reflect on it with a camera. And so it sounds like that's kind of what your approach is. So I think this is a really good opportunity to kind of jump into some of your work. I think we've done a really good job of kind of setting it up. So do you want to kind of move into a body of work and kind of talk through it and talk about, you have a couple of books. I think we have mostly books that we're going to look at, collections that made their way into books.
Well, let's go to the Lower East Side project that I did in 1980.
Cool.
To set that up a little bit, I did photographed it in 1980 and then put the work aside for many years. And then after 9/11, which was a very traumatic event for everyone, but particularly for people like me who, lived in New York and even lost friends in the buildings. It was a difficult thing, and I wanted to re-engage with the city somehow as a photographer. And, I decided that the way to do that would be to return to the Lower East Side where I started and re-photograph the neighborhood. So that's what I did. And it did it over a number of years. Again, working with a view camera and in color. And I decided early on not to do direct before or after pictures. I always find those interesting when people do that, but ultimately the after pictures are always less interesting than the before pictures. It's one of the things you discover as you try to do before afters is that when you get to that spot where you were X number of years before and you look at it again, whatever it was that inspired you to take that picture the first time, it's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
It somehow is, it's very rare that second picture isn't equal to that first picture.
Yeah.
So I decided to forget that. I was just going to, if it was obvious to do it, I would, and I actually ended up doing a couple of those, but mostly I just rediscovered the neighborhood afresh and, walked the same streets, looked at the same urban landscape, and then put it together in a book that mixed together the two periods and made it actually difficult to know when and where you were, to kind of challenge the idea of before or after. So let me bring up that.
Absolutely.
See if I can bring up that book.
I like that approach too, that at first you kind of started trying to do before and afters, but then kind of realized it wasn't there the same way, but then kind of rediscovering it. I think that's a great way to do that.
So this is the cover of the book, Time and Space on the Lower East Side, 1980 and 2010. The pictures were taken between really about 2003 and 2010. And the graphic on the right shows more or less where the Lower East Side is located in Manhattan. This, of course, is up to about 34th Street up here. And This was the two of us, which I will, uh, with our camera on the street. Um,
You got
kind of
Eni
the,
Brian.
yeah,
Love it.
kind of
Do you recognize him?
Mutt and Jeff photography here. Um, anyway, so this is how the book was set up. This is actually a PDF of the book, so it's exactly how it is in the book. So this was a picture on the left of Orchard Street, which was very consciously made to echo historic photographs of the Lower East Side. The other thing about the Lower East Side to remember is that the history of photography is very connected to the history of the Lower East Side. A lot of the major photographers of the 20th century and even the 19th century worked on the Lower East Side. Jake, excuse me, Jacob Riis photographed the tenements of the Lower East Side in the 19th century. He was an immigrant himself. He was also kind of a racist, but he believed that photography could expose what was going on in the world and hopefully lead to improvements. And so in many ways, he's considered the father of documentary photography, even photojournalism. So Jacob Riis took pictures similar to this one on the left, and other photographers like Louis Hine and there was several other people of that time period did these sort of iconic pictures of looking down the streets with push carts and the tenements and the fire escapes. And anyway, even in 1980, you could sort of squint a little and imagine that it was 100 years earlier.
Wow.
So that was picture taken in 1980, and the picture on the right is a similar, is the same street, a little further away, about a block different, but the red buildings on the right are the same building. And I did this in a snowstorm at the end of a snowstorm, and so you don't see any cars and you see very few people. And if you squint, you can imagine that this could be any time period. It not necessarily 2010 when it was taken. I should say about this picture, that this is one of these moments where you go out there, you've talked yourself into it, right? The weather is horrible, the snow has just begun to stop, but you're thinking, okay, and it's getting dark out, but maybe I can get a few pictures, right? So I go out there, I set this picture up, take it, and my camera tips over with me into that bank of snow on the left. I get snow all in the camera, and I realized that I couldn't go on any further, so I just packed it up, went back home, and I'd only taken this one picture.
I had a moment like that on a beach one time. A very same scenario. Yeah, that's so funny.
But so just moving on, I'm not going to get stuck on one or two pictures. The picture on the left is also kind of iconic. It makes you really think of the Lower East Side from 100 years before. And then on the right, it's not the same location, but it's similar, as nearby. You see modern advertising and fashion store and somebody walking their dog, and
It's interesting.
and a lot of times, like here, the tip off is like the cars. You can date the picture by the cars.
Absolutely.
Which is one of the things I hear sometimes from students is like, cars are just like a problem. Like, what do you do with them? They're always in the way, and they're you can't think that way. You really just have to go with the cars. I mean, the cars are
Yeah.
part of the world, and and people say, oh, when they're not as interesting as the old cars, and I think that's really not true. They will acquire more interests as the decades go by.
Yeah, wait 10 years and tell me the same thing. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny.
They're this shows the kind of desolateness on the right that existed at that time. There were large areas that were vacant, and here you see though that some people have started creating little plots of land to for either for gardening of some sort. You
Sure.
see, there's a boy in the opening there in the building holding a basketball. The picture on the left was taken just of a window where the carvings, like a kind of a gargoyle and a cherub here, have started to disintegrate. The soft stone that they were made from, it only lasts so long in the air in New York.
Mhm.
Anyway, this is a picture that Ed and I set. I remember this picture. We set it up on our tripod. It was nighttime, so that you get that kind of amber glow from the lights of that time. It's not like the LED lights now that are very clean. Um, and I said to Ed, like, go get us a cup of coffee. So we just opened the camera up, opened up the shutter. He went and got coffee, brought it back, and about 10 minutes later, we clicked the shutter closed. So this picture was taken while procuring coffee from the place on the corner.
10-minute exposure. It almost now
Yeah,
that I'm looking at the day now that I'm looking at the shadows and stuff, it now makes sense. But
it was pretty dim. It was pretty dim
yeah.
there. There was a street light.
That's a good shot. Good job.
We didn't know what we were doing though with stuff like that. We were just kind of guessing.
Yeah, of course.
This is a before or after that I actually did as close as I could. The two buildings on the left are the same, and so this was 1980 and 2010, and you can see that there's this garden that had now taking up the space where the vacant lot had been. And so there's a lot of that on the Lower East Side. Some of it's been developed and there are buildings there, but a deal was made that saved a lot of the community gardens, so they still exist.
What was it like to do this? What, 25, 30 years later? What
Well,
was it like?
I know the neighborhood really well. I'm pretty comfortable on the street there. It's I don't know what to say. I mean, when I did it the first time, it was it was a very edgy, even dangerous place, like on the left. On the other hand, it was my neighborhood. So I didn't necessarily go out to photograph how bad things looked. I wasn't really interested in, you know, I wasn't interested in what's sometimes now referred to as ruin porn. I was interested. No, well, you hear that.
No, I
Especially,
hear it all the time, actually. That's what
yeah,
everyone says. I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in yeah, because so many people, that's what they do. But go on.
yeah. So people get defensive about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But in 1980, this was my neighborhood, and I wasn't photographing to show. It was not my intention to show how bad things were. I was just showing what was there.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I would be later, I'd look and I was thinking, why didn't I do this or why didn't I do that? Well, at that time, it didn't seem extraordinary. It just seemed to be the place.
Mm.
So, anyway, going back was, it was mixed feelings about the things that had changed. My sense is that the Lower East Side was less of a separated kind of enclave that it had been, back in the day. It had more joined or become integrated into Manhattan as a whole, and it all obviously there was more money. It had become more gentrified. Um, this picture on the left, by the way, is one of the pictures that people gravitate to in this series. This woman who, in her fur coat, getting into her BMW. Meanwhile, there are drug dealers in the background and uh, some used clothing being sold on the fence back there.
Sure.
That's
selling VCRs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Selling boom boxes, big radios and cassette players and things like that. But this is a kind of crazy juxtaposition that you would see in New York. So the picture on the right is not, it's the same area, but not, it's not attempting to be the same location.
Mm-hmm.
But I put the two pictures together just because they are about crazy juxtapositions. The sort of black helicopter, like it's Vietnam or something above, and the this yellow jacket with a green tie just hanging on the fence there. And you can't see it very well, but up here in a bigger print, you can, the skywriting in the sky up here.
Wow.
And
what a moment.
This picture on the left, again, shows how desolate things were. This was a car that had caught fire. The fire department was there to put out the fire. There's nobody around, just this one rather strange looking guy. And the picture on the right was taken years later in the building to the right. And this was a real estate developer that was going to tear down the building, and they were actually one of my clients. And they called me up and said, hey, Brian, there's some interesting stuff in the building. Maybe you could come in and photograph it. Oh, wow. So I did this picture on the right, the Kill the Poor picture of flames sort of coming up the stairs here.
That's how they felt about it, huh? Wow.
So anyway,
yeah. Go ahead.
This is I'll just do a couple more of these and then we can move on. But this is also one of the iconic pictures from the series of the Twin Towers at the end of Henry Street. And the writing in my books is important to me. I bring my personal voice into it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it starts out on September 11th, 2001. I was in Amsterdam. The phone rang, and a friend in Berlin, in an urgent voice, told me to turn on the TV. I then watched in horror as the attack on the World Trade Center unfolded and the Twin Towers collapsed. A week later, I was back in New York on one of the first flights from overseas. So I am a more text-oriented photographer than a lot of people. To me, it's important to bring a voice in.
I like it. I like hearing. I like seeing the combination. It also brings a lot of context. It also brings in a lot of thoughts. There's a ton of academic writing that's talks about that, whether you should or shouldn't. It's always the big debate. So I love that. So you put together a book of that, and was this the one that sold about 1,000 copies from being self-published? Was this the one?
Well, I had done the Lost Border about the Iron Curtain, and that publisher, for reasons that I've never understood, just declined to do this book. I pitched it to them, but they didn't want it. So I said, I'm just going to do it. And I did it with a partner who had some more experience with actually doing a book himself. And so, I just put up the money and printed it, and then did all of the distribution of it myself. I sold online. I did a Kickstarter campaign. I went to the stores and got the buyers to take the book. There was a few stores that were really great to work with, and within a few years, I'd sold out the entire 1,000 copies of the first run. So it's a lot of work to move 1,000 copies. I don't know if you've ever seen 1,000 books, what it looks like when it arrives to your expensive storage space of it, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to sell it. And it's another book that needs to be, a new version needs to be done.
Sure. Were you surprised? It seemed like the way you wrote that, when I was reading it, you were talking about how, had no advertising campaign and so on. And it almost seemed like you were surprised it sold. Were you surprised or no?
Well, I don't think I would have done it if I didn't think that there was enough interest to do it. That's why I couldn't understand the publisher. I could see the interest, from my position, from my perspective, and it turned out I was right. So
yeah. Did you kind of do that just to prove your point?
Well, there was a little bit of, we always get a feeling of a little retribution when you.
Yeah, I told you.
Successful with something. Yeah. The thing is, the economics of doing your own book is difficult, but if you do it right, and if you get enough support, like doing a Kickstarter campaign, you can. I ended up making a profit. I did not lose money on this book. I didn't, make a significant amount of money, but I made enough that it was not nothing.
It was worth it. Yeah. That's awesome.
It hasn't always been that way, but I've usually managed to break even on pretty much all the projects I do.
Oh, that's great. I think a lot of publishers would love to sell 1,000 copies.
Yes.
If they could get that, so many people don't sell their initial run of 500, I think. So that's really, really good. So I'm curious. I guess this is the last question, and we can move on to the next thing, and you can set us up for that. But what do you think drew people to that body of work? What was it about that series that kind of drew your conviction? Because I know what it is for me. But.
Well, that time period, and particularly that moment in time in 1980 was kind of it was a really I don't know what the word is. It was a pivotal moment in New York history. You had you had punk rock going on. You had the whole downtown art scene happening. All the arts were involved in it. And at the same time, you had the sense that the city had bottomed out, that it was, you didn't know where this was going to go. And, of course, like a lot of these moments in time, it's ephemeral. It fades, it changes, you can't preserve these moments as in amber or whatever the expression is, forever. And you have to accept that. So people look back at that time period, and then with the juxtapositions that I brought in the book, it makes it all the more poignant. And so I think that there's a great deal of interest in that book because of that. And that brings us to the new book, which is kind of why we're here with this podcast, which is that years later, I re-photographed New York, but with a different attitude about how the city has been transformed and it's a different place and it has its own kind of present day integrity that is different from back then. I had gotten a little bit impatient with people being so fixated on that time period and on that aspect of my work as well. Not that I'm happy to get the attention for that, and I'm proud of that work that I did and that I did with Ed. But I really think that we need to get past that and
yeah.
Look at the present day city. And as I was telling you earlier, I have a son who's in his mid 20s, and growing up, he grew up in New York, and he, so I was seeing the city through his eyes, and I realized that he, for him and his generation, it's a new city. It's not about back then, and there's a whole new,
life, a new interest, whole new group of creatives moving it and doing things. Yeah, I know exactly.
So I decided at the advanced age of 70, which is what I am now, that I would, rediscover New York, my city, but a city that's for a lot of people has moved on. And I decided that it hasn't moved on for me. I'm going to live in the present, which is what I've always tried to do.
I love that. Is that what we're going to look at next?
Sure. Let's look at that.
Okay.
The book is called Last Stop, and or the full title, which we just decided to drop the subtitle, was Last Stop on This Train. When you get to the end of a subway line in New York City, there's a automated voiceover that says, "This is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train. Thank you for riding New York City Transit." So that became the title of the book. And
I love Nathan's hot dogs. I love them. You got me with that already. I'm in. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, what I was going to say is that I wanted to photograph the entire city, but that seemed to be a little bit excessive. It's a city of 8 million people or more, and it's pretty vast. So I was looking for a way to do it in pieces that would come together as a portrait of the present city. So I came up with the idea of going to the ends of the subway lines, and I felt like that also was consistent with the premise of this project, which is that the city is not as Manhattan centric as it once was, that it's become more multi-centered, and that those sort of satellite areas, many of which are at the ends of the subway lines, have taken on greater importance economically and culturally. So by doing that, by going to the ends of the line, I can then describe this, larger, more disparate kind of multi-centered city.
Not your typical New York photo.
Right.
Yeah.
It also, I should say though, this is a picture in East New York, which is a low-income neighborhood, and it shows an elevated train running past a community garden. One of these neighborhoods that's most people avoid and don't want to go there because they think of it as dangerous. But things like this go on there. This like really major undertaking by people, local people. But what I was going to say is that the ends of the trains in many cases are, far-flung places, but they're also in Manhattan. So like ends of lines are in lower Manhattan and Midtown, so that even though I may have thought that I was just going to be photographing like these far away areas, like New Lots, once Dutch farmland, is now part of East New York, the most notoriously crime-ridden of the city's neighborhoods. I grasped my camera firmly and walked the streets with the busy air of someone with a job to do. A few blocks from the end of the line, I found myself at a large community garden with its rows of vegetables and flowers. So that's that picture from before.
Mm-hmm. So did you at each one of these stops, did you stop there and then like spend a day or two? How talk to me about the process that you went through.
I did a lot of research before I went.
Okay.
Not necessarily like historical research, just a little bit of that. But I would, I'd get on Google Maps and Street View, and I would walk around, on Street View looking at what those neighborhoods were like. And then I would go there with some ideas of what I might photograph. Of course, the reality is that when you get on the ground, it's different completely, and you have to be open to what you see. You can't just go by that, preconception you have of what a place is like. This picture on the left, this was completely discovered as I was walking, this juxtaposition of these huge housing projects and these row houses. And a picture on the right where you see this colorful group of like very, ethnically mixed group of people with their kids coming probably from school. Maybe they were picking them up from a school bus. And then you go by this bike store, which is there for the guys who do the deliveries of food and stuff. And, so in a way, it kind of is a summation of things that go on in a neighborhood like this.
That's interesting.
And then,
so you would do research. Would you shoot it over a few days?
Not usually. What I would do is I would go. I would do like one day. I couldn't do more than like. Typically, I would do 2 to 4 hours walking around. More than that was tough because I was walking miles, right? Yeah. Although I kept around as close to the station as possible. Yeah. Sometimes I veered a little further out if it got interesting, as long as it felt connected to the station. But you would end up in places that you didn't expect to, like the end of this one train had me at Prospect Park. Mm-hmm. And so at one moment I'm photographing this, street corner with all of the sort of urban chaos. And then the next moment I'm in this moment of sublime beauty in the park.
It's true. Yeah. That's interesting.
And you would, one of the things about New York that, and particularly these far-flung neighborhoods, is that these are ethnic enclaves. Like this on the left here is, you can see on the sign to the left, it says Little Bangladesh. So this is a neighborhood that's has a lot of Bangladeshi restaurants and people from Bangladesh. And then you go a couple of blocks from there, and then on the right you have the ultra-Orthodox business selling these sukkahs, which are these structures that people use to um, live in and eat during a certain religious holiday. And it's like a whole business all unto itself.
Huh. Wow. Was there anything that surprised you while you did this project?
Well, it was constantly surprising. I don't know what to say. No, it's New York, and I expect to be. I expect odd things, right? You can never, underestimate New York.
So it wasn't boring, is what you're saying. Yeah.
No, and I'd go to these places I'd never been to before.
Yeah.
You live in New York, and you go your route, that takes you to the places that you go to, and but going to the ends of the lines, no, most people don't go to those places. But you see that, and you see the craziness of, like the train running between these buildings, this new building going up. It's this is like a bank building that's now a, sneaker business, sells, athletic shoes in a predominantly low income Black neighborhood. And one of the things that you see in an African American neighborhood is that barbershops and beauty salons are like social, sort of social focal points.
Mm-hmm.
This is and sometimes it's just like I just feel the pictures. There's something about it that just works. Like the picture on the right, it's kind of hard to explain. Why do you photograph this? And I can't really answer it, except that it just coheres as a picture. The scale differences between the buildings. Scale is like something I'm always aware of. Compositionally, that's something I have a hard time talking about, but I'm extremely attuned to composition, but my pictures are not about composition per se.
No, and when you said that thing about the cultural landscape, I think you're photographing a place almost like it's a portrait of a person. And so it's not about being, architecturally sound so that you get the or whatever. It's about something else. And it's very present in these. And I saw it in your earlier work. It seems like you were developing it in that first body of work in New York in the 80s, and then it's kind of stayed with you, and just continues to evolve. One of the other things that I've noticed in a lot of your images are you kind of are you doing like HDR? It seems like you're getting really good detail in the shadows. like
I'm not using HDR, but I am I am working in Photoshop to get getting as much out of there as I can.
Pop in those colors. It's nice.
Yeah, but I don't pop colors. I keep it. If anything, I actually bring down the.
You do?
Yeah, because I think the digital. I'm using a medium format digital camera, very high resolution camera, 102 megapixel camera. So these if I wanted to print them like really large wall size, I could do that.
That's awesome.
So the detail is never ending in these, and it's consistent with what I was doing before when I was shooting 4x5 film. But there's a difference between film and digital.
Absolutely.
And digital tends to be a little more punchy, just out of the, just if you don't do anything to it, a little punchier, maybe a little sharper in a way that's better or worse. I don't know. I haven't decided. They're different. I
Sure.
wouldn't say that one is better than the other. I mean, people get, rhapsodic about, film and it's just, I've certainly shot enough of it over the years, but it's only now that I'm shooting this digital, and it's only
Well,
now
it's
that I can afford to get a camera like this.
yeah. Well, and I think so many people, they tie up their identity in the film for some weird reason. But one of the things I do notice about your compositions, and you can go back to that one page, is you pack in a lot of information
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
Like one photo could do it, like really present kind of uh, a slice of reality per se. The amount of people
Well,
that are in the frame, the different color depths, it's like the lines that are taking you in all interesting different directions, but you're packing it in, and then some you're very subtle with it. You're not doing all of that. So you have this really interesting balance that I'm really enjoying. I like it a lot. I noticed it when I first saw your work. I was just curious, like if you were,
yeah.
if that's what you're trying to do, or if that's just something you naturally, and you kind of alluded to it. You're like, why do I take this image over another? And you go, I don't know. I just kind of, I just know, like, and so I was
Well,
curious what the way you think about it.
well, these are three. I wish they were. The book has smaller images like this on the left. They should all be big, but we wanted to get more pictures in rather than fewer. There's some books I've done where it's, 50 pictures is enough. This is
Yeah.
one of these books where it's kind of like it wants to be more rather than less.
Okay.
I don't know why, but somebody said this to me the other day that they were greedy and they wanted more pictures. Um, they meant that as a compliment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
But uh, yes, I'm aware of both the information and the the kind of composition going on. Like this picture on the right, I feel like there's like lots of little moments. I mean,
Yeah, there are.
there's this woman with her uh with her what's the word for
Like
that?
a walker?
Yeah, it's a walker.
A
That's what it
walker with
is.
a little carrier on it?
Yeah, it's a walker with has a seat on it. That's right.
There
So
you
that
go, yeah.
you could use it for bags, but you could also sit in it if you were needed to rest or
If you
something.
needed a moment, yeah.
Yeah. So you got that going, and then you've got the people sitting back here. You've got this guy, I don't know what he's doing here. And then you have the people who are probably selling stuff on the street. And then you have all the fruit and um, you can see that there's other languages here. This is a Russian neighborhood. This is called the Samarkand Bazaar. It says Ukrainian place or way up here. This is Brighton Beach, which is a Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish
Mm.
neighborhood.
Mhm.
And the pictures like this one on the left, I think I saw the flashes of color. And what you have is on the left is some kind of a kindergarten or daycare or something with colorful um, signage, and they made colors on the railings of the stairs. And then my eye moves to the Ukrainian flag to the right, which has an American flag on the underside, on the back side of it, which you can see as it folds under. And so to me that and it's a very simple shot, but I think that's all you need to have to make it work. But what I was going to say is that this is there's an image that's in the wrong order here. I have to. This is not the final book where I photographed the beach at Brighton Beach, and there's all I'm photographing is just this open beach with nothing else. So sometimes you just accept what's there and you don't try to make more of it. And with Coney Island, there's a lot to make of it.
Of course.
It's because there's so much going on.
I just love you have this really interesting ability to kind of, and what I noticed and what I like about your work and is that like you have this ability to pack an image but then be subtle with it at the same time, and it just shows experience, I think, but also like a really a sensibility about where you are, and you're really where you are. You know, you're not like trying to present another perspective. You're really trying to capture your impressions, and that's what I get. And maybe you can add to that or say that I'm on the right track or not. But I feel a sensibility about and a respect for a place when I look at your images. So,
I'm not trying to transform these places into something else. I wanted to feel true to the place, and I think that's been consistent with my work over the years.
Yeah.
So the organization of the book is by borough. I had originally wanted it to be the lines of the subway itself, but my publisher thinks it's more complicated, and then so we go by boroughs, which is fine. I'm okay with it. So this is in the Bronx in Riverdale.
Wow. You have a neighborhood like a what are those, row houses? Or is that what those are? No.
Well, here, this is a neighborhood that's kind of upscale, like onto the right here.
Yeah.
Street with this lawnmower that's just sitting there, and there is some text that's actually in the final book about this, but like this picture here in the middle, those stones were placed there in the early 1900s as samples of granite to be used for the facade of Grand Central Terminal in Midtown. And they wanted to see how the weather would act upon the stone. And they never removed the stones. So they've been there in the Bronx since 1903 or whatever it was. And you have to kind of know where they are. They're on a path in this forested area of the park there.
What an interesting story. Are they worn? Or are they like, how did they hold up?
They held up really well.
Yeah. I think granite doesn't wear like.
Yeah, no, they were covered with graffiti previously, and eventually the Parks Department and some nonprofit group have rescued them and maintained them, so they're well taken care of now. So they just sit in the woods.
Gotcha. Is there a name for it? Like, what's the name for it? Like, I think you said it. I missed it, I think.
They just call it the Grand Central Stones, I think.
The Grand Central Stones. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I'm sure there's all kinds of little Easter eggs like that hidden throughout the city, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, one of the things that I think is important to bring up here is that, we're at this very difficult time politically with, Trump coming in January with the promise of deporting millions of illegal immigrants. And a lot of these neighborhoods are built on the immigrants, whether they're legal or not. And so there's going to be a great deal of trauma in some of these places. And, you see this picture on the left, you can see part of the word Bangladesh on the right, and this place where people are this car place or where they fix flat tires and things like that. These are the kinds of businesses that employ immigrants, whether they're legal or not legal. And these are the thing that people say is, well, what's the problem? What's going to be really bad for the U.S. is that these people, if they're forced to leave, these are the people that do jobs that other people don't want to do. But what I would say, which I think is even more significant, is these people bring an entrepreneurial spirit that a lot of local people don't bring, the people that are already on the ground here. That if you come to the United States with hopes and dreams for you and your family, these are people with ingenuity and creativity, and they bring something to these neighborhoods that would not exist otherwise. And it's not always pretty. Like, these places like what we're looking at here look pretty bad, but there's a lot of activity going on in these places.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see what
the
happens.
situation is complex. It was an interesting election season for like I said, that Chinese proverb, may you not live in interesting times. We definitely live interesting times. It's pretty interesting for sure.
And there's what's also interesting is the overlay of history that's like this is in Upper Manhattan at the end of the A train and in Inwood, and this refers to the Dyckman House. Now the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum is the oldest remaining farmhouse on Manhattan Island, a vestige of New York City's rural past. And the sign there, the picture of a girl there on the right represents a formerly enslaved person who lived in that house.
Interesting. Wow. So how many different boroughs are in this book?
Well, all of the boroughs are in the book.
So every one is represented. So they all have a line that ends in them.
Yes, they do, including Staten Island.
Oh,
which wow. And they're also like this. This is Washington Heights is this neighborhood that's largely Dominican, people from the Dominican Republic, although there are other people. This is an example of where the stone underlying Manhattan sort of comes up to the surface. It's almost like a mountain range in the foreground of the image of the George Washington Bridge, which goes over to New Jersey. And
it's basically what the city is built on, a slab of granite, basically, right? That's why it doesn't sink into the to the bay. It's because it's basically a big piece of granite.
The silly joke that people say is the Bronx is nice, GNEISS, but Manhattan is schist, SCHIST, which is the stone underlying most of Manhattan.
Yeah, it's a geology joke. Yeah, I like them. I like it. It.
Yeah, so here you have examples of the evidence of the immigrant nature of Washington Heights, and here you have people who are obviously poor, who are feeding these machines with their bottles and cans and things to get money. So these are people that collect they go around collecting bottles. And then at the same time, in the same neighborhood close by, you have this street on the left, which is an absolutely preserved early 19th century street with a mansion at the end, which was at one point was General Washington's headquarters during the Revolutionary War. And I remember when I did this picture, I walked 30 minutes in this area in Manhattan without seeing another soul.
That is rare. What was going on?
It's just an area. It borders a park, and there just were no people around.
Wow.
But then just a block or two away, you'd be on a major thoroughfare with lots of people. And now we're in Harlem, and this is an image of Bill Bojangles Robinson, who was a tap dancer, extraordinary star of film and stage.
It's when you do a project like this, you focused on one part of the city, and now you kind of picked you decided to take on a venture that would take you all around the city. And when you do a project like this, do you fall more in love with the city, or do you talk to me a little bit about that dynamic? I know we all have dynamics with our cities. Like, there's sometimes I love Paris and sometimes I hate it. So, like, what did Bush do for you? Like your psyche, your feelings, because it seems to be done with care. So,
yeah, no, I'm a pretty, pretty much of a New Yorkophile. I have been here for a long time. Like anybody, I get upset and frustrated and wish that things could be done better, or think that it's absolutely crazy that there's no direct train route to JFK Airport. Things like that.
It was very specific. It was very specific. Yeah.
Well, that's one of those things that I encountered.
Yeah. You're like, well, I just wish. Yeah. No, go ahead.
But in general, I think it's just a remarkable testimony. The city is a remarkable testimony to the ability of different kinds of people, of different ethnicities, different religions, to get along and to actually thrive. Despite all of the problems and difficulties.
Yeah.
This right here is this is Grand Central Terminal. So Grand Central is actually the end of one of my lines. There's a very short line in the system just referred to as the shuttle. It's the Grand Central Times Square shuttle that runs just east-west and connects these two centers. And what I wrote here is something that I feel, is really sums up a lot of, we're talking about how I feel about New York. So let me just read this, because I think this is really significant. Grand Central Terminal has always felt to me like the epicenter of New York City. Many years ago, before the advent of cell phones, I arranged to meet a friend at the famous clock atop the information kiosk, located beneath the starry zodiac painted high above on the ceiling. I was running late and called Grand Central. There was a number, and my friend was paged and my message relayed. It was a moment that captured the miracle of the city, here in the heart of the metropolis, at the nexus of a vast web of trains, in the swirling crowds and the blur of anonymity. You realize that it all revolves around you, one individual out of millions. That sense of identity is the secret of every New Yorker.
It's interesting. Well, it's. I don't have a lot to add to that. I think you captured that perfectly. I love that last frame too that you said, that last image. It seems like a still from a movie. That just seems like a moment from a movie.
This is another one. This is another one of those images where your eye moves from one thing.
A lot of places. Yeah.
And of course goes back to the, to the clock here and the sculpture. But, you see, then you see this man who's obviously talking to these guys. And then there's this little thing going on over here. And, it's just.
It's really, it's one of those where you pack in a lot of information. I really enjoy it. Go ahead.
And then we come to Times Square, which is the other end of the shuttle, which is, really, I photographed it, in early evening when it's sort of at the signage is at its kind of peak. And then I talk about that too. I say that, tourist New York exists as a parallel universe and includes Times Square and Fifth Avenue, along with other attractions like observation decks, the Statue of Liberty, and the Vessel in Hudson Yards. Anyway, it says, it remains spectacular, however, and you should probably check it out if you want to visit tourist New York.
Yeah.
The point being that most New Yorkers will tell you that they hate Times Square.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to hate about Times Square. It's also spectacular and you shouldn't miss it.
Yeah, it's I've actually been there. And I wasn't, it was just, it honestly felt like a carnival. It didn't feel like a real place. It felt like it was all kind of fabricated. But also a lot of those like touristy areas are where a lot of pickpockets and people are. So
yeah,
you just got to keep your eyes down, up and down as much as you can. But I love this particular, I remember being on this bridge and it just snowing. It was one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen. So especially with this bridge.
Well, the Brooklyn Bridge is, at the end of it is City Hall in Manhattan, and that's all. City Hall is the end of one of the subway lines, the 6th line, and so I felt like I needed to get a picture of the bridge.
Of course,
it's great. I love it. It's like your assignment is get a good picture of the Brooklyn Bridge, right? So that's what I do. Is I find a good picture of the Brooklyn Bridge, and so I just decided to walk up there and see what I could come up with. And I've been many times and I've taken pictures many times, and I have some other pictures of the Brooklyn Bridge from different locations. And, but this is where, you show the majesty of the bridge with the skyline. And at the same time, of course, you have the tourists who are, focused on their phone.
Yeah, you do a really good job of like capturing these little micro moments. I keep coming back to it, but like especially in that image, just how it's like you play with the edges of the frame really, really well. I like it.
And then the World Trade Center is the end of the E train, so I got to photograph the
monument.
Yeah. And then at the very end of the island, this was a wonderful moment where there was a snowfall that was one of these wet snows that stick to the branches, kind of heavy snow that will very quickly fall off. But if you catch it at the right moment, the tracery of the branches gets emphasized.
Yeah. We had one of those moments just recently in Paris.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
We don't have any snow here, but it's really cold.
The wind is biting between the buildings and in the streets sometimes. Yeah.
So these are the Manhattan images through here. This picture on the right is an old pier that, they decided to just leave the pilings of the pier there. This is actually intentional. And the reason that the color of the sky and the water is this kind of orange color is that this was last summer, there were these fires in Canada that the smoke was being brought down a huge distance to New York, and it actually became problematic. It was bad to breathe, and but magical from a photographic perspective.
Yeah.
People have taken lots of pictures of underneath the elevated subway.
Yeah.
This is in Astoria at the end of the N and the W lines. So it's almost a genre in itself, these pictures that are taken underneath, but this one really works for me. It's again, a complex scene with a lot of little things going on and a lot of details. It also shows the kind of small business vitality that you get in these neighborhoods at the ends of the lines. I counted more than a dozen individual businesses that are represented in this, either by storefronts or by signage. And then you have and then people like sitting on there's chairs are put out in front of one of the businesses and somebody's sitting there, and you have the bikes and the scooters, and you have people coming up and down the stairs, and all of the color and the you can almost hear the trains and the sound, and so to me this is a very rich image, and I think is a kind of really describes what it's like in the outer, so-called outer boroughs in many places in the city.
I really love this idea. I think the whole idea of kind of going to ends of unless you live in a city, and I know a lot of my American audience doesn't know this, but a lot of my Europeans understand this, believe it or not. We have a lot of these ending points, and it's just so fruitful for subject matter and stuff like that. But also, I think it's also lends itself to a really interesting personal journey, kind of something that you get to kind of experience. It must have felt like a privilege.
Well, it's a privilege, and it's also a challenge, to be to find yourself sort of sometimes out of your comfort zone in places that you don't know, and where you feel like, this is not someplace I would normally be. But that's what, photographers do. You always have an excuse as a photographer to go places and see things and to ask questions and find pictures. So you go to a place like, this is Flushing, Queens, which is at the end of the 7 line. And the 7 line has been described as being the most diverse, the line that runs through the most diverse neighborhoods in New York City. And it ends up in this part of the city, which has supplanted the Manhattan Chinatown as the center of Chinese and other Asians nationalities. And if you look at the signage, you see very little English. And that's the way it is there. And it's fascinating, and this is one of the probably most dynamic centers in New York at this point. This image here, it's actually going to be larger in the final book, again, shows these kinds of businesses that you get in these neighborhoods. Like here they're doing curtains, there's some kind of woodworking company, you have this housing in the background, and then here you have the plane arriving above, which is landing at LaGuardia Airport, which is nearby, and it's constant, one plane after another passing overhead. Anyway, it's Flushing. You could do many of these places. You could do whole projects just about those places.
Each one of the
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure you could.
And then you find yourself in places like this, which makes you think you're in England or something. This is Forest Hills, which is a planned community, early 20th century, and as I refer to as one of the architectural jewels of New York, in this is kind of Tudorish style. But it's very desirable, fairly upscale neighborhood, and it's where the U.S. Open tennis tournament originated. There was a private tennis club there, Forest Hills, and as that got bigger, it became what's now the U.S. Open, which is in its own set of stadiums near off the 7 line.
I'm curious about like the mix. Would you say that all the ends of the lines, like the percentage wise, would you would end up in a lower income neighborhood versus a higher income neighborhood? Is it like 10%, 90%? I know this is just anecdotal, just kind of my own kind of curiosity, but did you find yourself in I'm curious about where you would find yourself.
I think more times than not, these are lower income neighborhoods. But in many cases, they are very dynamic neighborhoods.
So they're
like
just
Jamaica, Queens is you would not describe it as a wealthy place, but it's got a lot. You can see these large buildings here. It's got a lot of going on there. So there's it's a transportation hub. It's all kinds of businesses. And then you have other, like this actually 179th Street station. It's the end of the line of the F train. And this street on the right, to the south side of the street, to the right side of the street, it's a kind of middle income neighborhood of a certain working class kind of aspect to it. To the left, Jamaica Estates is more upscale, and that street becomes like the dividing line between these two neighborhoods. And in fact, this is where Donald Trump comes from. This house right here on the right was his boyhood house, and it now sits empty with the front yard in the weeds. And I have no idea why it's like that, but it is.
Wow. That's interesting.
And this is
He's such a polarizing figure. I'm sure people figure that out and they just don't want to be harassed,
Well, that's possible.
I bet that's probably what it is, It's just really interesting. I think we have 5-10 more minutes.
This is another favorite picture of mine. This is Broad Channel, which is an island in the Jamaica Bay, and the subway runs across the island, stops there, and the island is very low lying. Much of it is wetlands, marshland, and you can see the train in the background crossing. And it's very likely that this island won't last another 50 years. But
it's kind of I'm making a strange association. The lone flag in the middle of land or whatever. It's kind of like the moon being claimed. It's kind of out there. I like it. I think it's interesting. Yeah. Wow. It's interesting that you're kind of trying to and it might be kind of a response to kind of other people's responses to that previous body of work that you showed us. And it's like, well, we have a great city today. You know what I mean? It's just as alive as it was back then. You know, it has its own unique problems and own unique group of people now in it. And I think that's an interesting place to be. And I think you even referenced it earlier when you were talking about your son and how he looks at the city and seeing it through his eyes and so on. It kind of do you feel like that's what kind of inspired this particular body of work? Is that
Yeah,
were you trying to maybe see the city and hit through his eyes? Maybe.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Um,
I love that. I think that's great.
he-
That's
there was this moment when he was I don't know how old he was, maybe 14 years old, 12 years old. We were on the subway on the Williamsburg Bridge. You know, the train runs on the bridge, so you have the city below you. You can see it, and I remember him at one point saying, as we were on the bridge, that he says there are times when here in New York I feel like I'm at the very center of the world, and you know, I had that moment myself. You know, I've had those moments myself when I was younger, feeling that. And whether it's true or not is not the point. I mean, obviously, there are lots of other great places in the world, and any number of great reasons to be in those other places. But that's what New York will give to you if you open up to it, is this sense that you're at a place where what you do matters, and that you're not. I mean, I'm here. I have this view of the skyline, which I was telling you about. I have the United Nations directly across from me there. You know, um, this is you know, you're here in New York. You feel you have some. There's a. I feel have a kind of mission that I'm on here, um, and that I'm not here just to hang out. There are a lot of great places to hang out in the world. There's great cities to hang out in if you want to just like do that. But if you know, if it's about trying to get some things done, you know, you can't beat the city for that.
I love that. It's very American.
Well, yeah.
Just that kind of sensibility, that kind of thought. It's awesome. I like that.
Well, I've lived in Europe too,
Yeah.
and I
So you know what I mean.
yes, and my wife is from the Netherlands, and I'm not a I'm very pro Europe. I love
Yeah.
Europe, and I'm you know not a jingoistic American, but I can't, you know, of course I have to admit that I'm, you know, I mean I'm pretty mortified by what's going on here politically. It's pretty distressing,
Yeah.
but it's up to artists to keep things honest and true.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I really enjoyed our conversation today. I only have one last question for you, and it's one I ask everybody, and it's really I'm going to do something with these. I now have 60 of these responses. I think this might be number 60. I'm in that number, but I'm curious if you have any like advice for people that are image makers themselves or want to be photographers or want to take their work to that next level. Is there any wisdom you can pass on to our audience?
Huh. I should have a prepared answer for that one.
No, I like spring in this one. So I like it.
The it's a tough time to become an image maker or a photographer. There are too many of us out here. There's not enough work. Of course, there never was enough work, but there's particularly not enough work now. Um, and the art market is kind of it's tough for photographers, I think, in general. So I don't know what to say. But the reality is you have to do what you know what you want and believe in, and you have to follow your own nose in that, because if you don't, you don't know what you could have done.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to just like say, I'm not going to go into the arts because there's no money in it, or there's no this or that. But you can't think that way. So, it's, for me, the difficulty was like finding a way to balance doing artwork and then doing work that I could make enough money to live on.
Yeah.
So at least with photography, you have you can you can work commercially and make some money. Yeah. As a painter, for instance, or some other kind of artist, those options are even more difficult. You might have to end up working in something that's unrelated to your art. Most of the people I know who made the decision to become commercial photographers stayed commercial photographers and did very little artwork. I'm actually one of the few people. Yeah, no, and you have to keep feeding the monster that you've created.
Yeah, it's true.
No, you do, and it's
no, I know. That's where I came from.
You have to be good at it. You can't just fool around, because you're up against a lot of other great people.
Yeah.
So for me, though, I've done all these projects, and I've paid the price of not having had a lot of commercial photography success. But on the other hand, I've been able to do dozens in the end. I don't know how many projects, and at least a half a dozen of them are I think of fairly significant importance.
When I think about what you're saying there, that you walk that fine line of commercial and then art, and I often reflect on art, and a lot of the art throughout time ends up in museums, and that's what we reflect on. So that's what we think about, I think about Egyptian work, and I think about, the Greek statues that are here in the Louvre, and so it's so vital to who we are as a human species. It's never going to disappear. So if you choose this route, you are picking something, in my opinion, that I think is quite noble. But it's also not for the faint of heart. It's got to be something that's in your heart. And that's what you were saying. I think that's really, really important. But the other point that I think you were also just saying there was this, when you do go the commercial route, they keep you so busy that you're basically building that archive of, commercial work that goes to advertising. It's almost like fast fashion, They use it for a few months, and then they need something else, and it just kind of disappears into oblivion. And in Paris, they actually have these like museums of Dior and all these different, and so you get to see that, but it's in that context there. But I think what you're doing has something that has like staying power, like that work that. That's why I asked you about the privilege part of it. It seems like a privilege. You get this opportunity to be a witness and archive and to create these bodies of work in the way you uniquely can do it. And I think that has more staying power. It's going to be the work that people reflect on and go back to. There's no emotional connection to a brand that is often done in commercial work. There's just this revelation or understanding about time and place, and and people, and that's what you get to do, and that's art, especially in photography. And so I think it's interesting. I hear you kind of reflecting on that. So I think that's a whole podcast in its own. I think, that topic in itself. So that's cool. Thank you for coming on. I had a really great time talking to you, and I love your work. I'm a big fan. So this is the opportunity for you to share with our audience how they can buy your books, find you, Instagram if you have it, socials if you've got them. This is where you can share all that contact with our audience.
Well, my, brianrose.com is my website, so that's fairly easy. Some of the books can be found online, and you can go to my website to find the links to those. You can also just go on Amazon and see what's there. But also a number of them are out of print. They've sold out. So, for instance, the Atlantic City book, the Monument Avenue book, and the Time and Space on the Lower East Side books, those are all sold out.
Look at you. Selling out books. That's awesome. Congratulations, by the way. That's a good thing.
You would think you would sell books out and people would be at your doorstep saying, they want to do more, but it hasn't gone that way. But yes, you could just, and you just start, you go to my website. I'm on Instagram, Brian Rose NYC 3. And there are several Facebook groups that I hang out in that have to do with landscape photography. And I'm on Threads, and I've started posting on Blue Sky as well.
Cool.
So you just have to track me down. So my stuff is out there.
There's another Brian Rose out there, who's a podcaster, I think.
Yeah, there are other Brian Roses. There's a politician in London who I'm not particularly happy to be share his name, but
I love the name, by the way. It's such a great name. It's good for a photographer. It looked good on the logo, so
it works.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you so much for coming on, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And to all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please like, share, and comment down below. That all helps support this show because it gives us all those additional algorithm notes in order to kind of promote our content. So please like, share, and comment. If you really, really love us and you want to support us in a little deeper way, consider becoming a Patreon member on our Patreon page or becoming a supporter on Spotify. You can do that as well. So do that if you love us. And as always, we'll see you next time.